What is up, my ducks and drakes? Welcome to the Crowded Lake, and today we'll be reading Chapter 17 of A Lesson in Practicality by ResidentAnchor on AO3. If you would like to support the author, do so with the links in the description below to both of the AO3 profile and to the fic itself. So with that being said, here's Chapter 17, Daybreak. Thomas wasn't quite sure how long they had been running, but he was quickly out of breath and his lungs started to burn with intense sudden exercise they were doing. Shouldn't we stay and help? No. I don't feel okay just leaving him behind. Thomas ran into the back of Patton. He wasn't sure which one he was and stumbled back apologizing. The Patton turned around, eyes panicked and breathing heavy, staring right up at him. I don't want to leave them, but what good would have us there do? I can't do anything, and you can't control your powers. Thomas flinched and looked away shamefully. The Patton turned and stared, marching forward, hand still clasped with Thomas's, and pulled him along. So, where are we going? I don't have a phone, and you don't have anyone's number, so we're going to tell the others. That's across town. I don't have any better ideas, and I can feel Patton freaking out, and it's making me freak out more. So I'm doing the only thing I can think of doing, and that's getting help. Thomas stayed quiet as they marched through the city. He kept a careful eye out to make sure that they were heading the right way. Neither was in the right mind to get lost. Thomas's legs started to shake when they got to a seat on the bus. An action he was sure bothered the other, but let him do it anyway. They were both coping with what had happened differently. This version of Patton seemed like the real one, but he knew it wasn't. He leaned in and slowly and whispered to the other, "Have I met you before? On the roof?" He watched the other nod and leaned back. He hadn't seen how many were out. One grabbed his hand and just pulled him away from the scene. The copy stared out the window once more, and Thomas was lost in his thoughts. When they hopped off the bus, Thomas had more questions buzzing through his head, with the scene replaying in his head more and more. So, which one are you? 4. Okay, so why were you the one to grab my hand? Because 2 does whatever Pat says, and 3 and 5 are particularly best friends. When we split apart, we all had an idea of what we were doing, or Patton had an idea of what we all should do. I don't know, it's really confusing. Whoa, calm down. No! 4 stopped and spun around. I can't calm down. Whoa, okay. Thomas held up his hands and took a careful step closer. 4 reached much more worked up than when they had gotten off the bus. Thomas felt guilty. He was so lost in his own thoughts, he didn't see how bad the other had gotten. You need to breathe, okay? Just take a deep breath and tell me what's wrong. I can't. 4 took a sharp breath in and shut his eyes, tears quickly running down his face. He looked over and watched Thomas take a deep breath, trying to copy him. He managed to get a decent breath in, and Thomas motioned for him to do it again. 4 took a deep breath. On the bus, I stopped feeling 3 for a little bit. Thomas froze at the news, watching 4 continue to take deep breaths. But you can now, right? 4 nodded, rubbing the tears from his face. That's good. That means that he's okay now. Roman and all the others are still there to keep him safe. 4 looked up and smirked a bit. You know, 3 always said I was the unmotivated one. I always make sure we relax and take time to breathe, but that's just a nice way of calling me lazy." He shook his head and looked up at Thomas. "I didn't feel lazy back there." "It was kind of you to get me out of danger. You're right. I probably would have panicked and had been a sitting duck for whatever that thing was." Quack. Thomas looked over at Four as a smile broke out of his face. "Did you just... Aw, did I ruffle your feathers, kiddo?" Thomas couldn't hold back a laugh that followed, taking the time to appreciate how it made him relax a bit. He hadn't even known how tense he had gotten. "Let's go to the others, okay?" Four nodded, a look of pure conviction staring back at Thomas as he spun around, marching with more vigor back to the apartment. Four didn't hesitate to skip steps up the stairs, leaving Thomas behind as he threw the apartment door open. Four glanced around, noting the TV was off and the room was unoccupied, the only possible two people preferring silence and solitude, leaving the common area quiet. Four heard a thud and turned his head as Thomas entered the apartment, far more out of breath than he was. Virgil came running in with a panicked look and staring at the two of them in confusion. His eyes flickered from Four to Thomas and back, widening and straightening up more. "Logan!" The sound of the door bursting open, followed by a heavy footfall, soon was replaced by Logan, arms stretched out in front of Virgil protectively as he held his hand out at the two in the doorway. He blinked and dropped his arms, looking confused. "Is everything all right?" "My hero," Virgil mumbled, pushing Logan's arm carefully out of the way. "What happened? I thought you were with Roman." Virgil walked over closer and stopped when he saw Thomas shake his head. "Virg?" He looked up at Patton and watched as they bit their lip. "I'm Four." Virgil barely had time to react before Logan was in front of Four, holding on to his shoulders firmly. What happened? "Well, we were being followed," and Logan held up his hand, stopping the other from talking. Short version. "That cloud thing showed up and attacked us." Logan and Virgil let out a gasp anonymously as Thomas nodded at the statement. "Thomas, I need you to think of where you were when it showed up. You got me?" He looked over at Virgil as he realized what was happening before nodding. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Virgil copied the motion soon after. Without hesitation, Virgil broke free, pushing into Logan and walking up, pulling the other two with them. He was careful to not make contact with Thomas, already worried what could happen in this situation. "Excellent. You two stay here. We'll bring them back." Four nodded, tugging Thomas out of the way as Logan ran through the portal. Virgil quickly followed. They stood there silently, hoping they returned quickly to the others. Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder and looked over at Four with a frown. "They're okay, I'm sure." Four looked away, tugging his hand back. "If 3 dies..." "No, don't even think about that." "I have to," Four shouted, glaring back. "He's a part of me. We're all a part of a bigger person. If a piece of us dies, does that mean we can never be whole again?" "Four?" Thomas was at a loss, unsure of what to say. Four looked away ashamed, eyes darting around and trying to find something to grab his attention. The sudden noise took their attention as Logan came through, quickly spinning around and looking back. "Make way. We need to get him to the couch." They didn't hesitate to dart out of the way as Roman came through, Patton's arm around his shoulder, and Roman half carrying him, arm around his waist. Patton seemed tired and obviously had been crying, but was tiredly walking with Roman, gaze on the floor. Virgil came through quickly after, glancing at Four and shutting his eyes. Four grabbed Thomas as the flow of time started once more, catching him as he stumbled. "Patton!" Thomas exclaimed, wanting to get a closer look as Roman placed him on the couch carefully. Patton fell back with a heavy sigh of relief, shutting his eyes. 4 raced forward, pushing everyone else out of the way. Hey, it's 3. Patton opened his eyes and smiled. He held out his hand slowly, and 4's face lit up, reaching forward and grabbing it, disappearing in a bright flash. Patton hissed in pain and took a moment before relaxing into the couch. He smiled and looked over at Thomas as he did. Thank you. I ran away, Thomas mumbled, and he shook his head. I wasn't helping at all. You calmed 4 down, if only a little bit. Thank you. Enough talk, you need to rest, Roman spoke, taking a blanket he had just pulled from Patton's room and unfolding it. You always did have the best blankets. Patton smiled as Roman stretched it out over him and let Roman take his glasses. Guys, I'm okay, really. Just a bit sore and tired. What did it do to you? Virgil mumbled, watching his friend closely. Patton slowly pushed himself off the couch, holding up a hand to stop Roman from helping. He grimaced and leaned back, sitting up and wrapping himself in a soft, fluffy blanket. Roman, would you mind? Oh, no, of course, Pat. Roman cleared his throat and turned to the others. I tried capturing it and attacking it, but nothing seemed to work. No, wait. Virgil spoke up, interrupting him. How did it find you? Did it crawl out of a sewer or something? Roman seemed to brace himself before speaking, looking unconfident, which was unusual for him. It, seems our smoky friend can sort of possess people. What? Virgil turned to look at Patton and turned to Thomas. You didn't think to mention that part? Thomas flinched and shook his head. Sorry, but we just wanted to know they were okay. Virgil, that's not fair. I didn't tell you either. Don't start yelling at him. Virgil groaned and turned away from the group, pulling his hood up and keeping his distance. We know what it can do and what it wants now, though. Really? Logan questioned. Power. Roman turned and looked at Logan and wanted me for 3, claiming I had more power. I thought you were going to agree too. You gave me a heart attack. Roman turned back to Patton and kneeled down, grabbing his hand. You scared me back there. I'm sure I did, and I am sorry. Roman rubbed Patton's hand comfortingly. I hurt you in more ways than one. Patton tugged on Roman's hand, patting the spot on the couch next to him. Roman got up and sat next to him, quickly being pulled into a side hug from Patton. He wrapped an arm around him, and Patton rested his head on Roman's shoulder, letting out a long sigh and closing his eyes once more. I forgive you, Ro. You saved 3. Sure, it hurt, but I'm okay. Patton snuggled into Roman, pulling his legs up and making sure his blanket covered him completely, tuning out the other's conversation. He felt a hand on his face, peering up and seeing the fuzzy outline of someone staring back through glasses. Patton? I need to check to make sure you're okay before you sleep. Hello? He made no effort to move as Logan peeled back the blanket, taking in Patton's hands. He glanced back up and watched Logan flip his hands over, inspecting them carefully. Logan sighed and let Patton's hands go, placing the blanket back where it was, tucking him back in carefully. I know we speculated this before, but it seems we are genetically a bit more durable. Not by much, but enough, it seems, to only leave Patton's hands a bit red and sore after apparently being electrocuted. Three's hands were worse, like he took most of the damage. What could that mean? Logan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Honestly, I've been speculating about Patton's abilities, but I'm not completely sure how they work. He's in no condition to test them now, so I'm not sure. Well, can I help? Thomas rubbed his hands together, uncomfortable as the attention turned to him. I can copy his power, and we can have me do tests, right? While commendable, you forget that you don't just copy. Thomas's shoulders sagged as he sighed, nodding. We aren't sure he can handle the power drain right now. Roman rubbed Patton's arm and looked over, spotting his closed eyes. He hesitated for a moment and realized Patton's breathing had evened out more and shifted. Hey, he whispered, turning on the couch and watching as Patton blinked awake. I'm going to carry you to your room and get you some sleep, okay? Patton closed his eyes once more, and Roman slipped a hand underneath the other, holding him close from behind his back and under his knees and pulling him close. Everyone made way as Roman nudged open Patton's door and walked in, placing him in his bed. Perhaps we should relax and regroup tomorrow to go over everything, Logan suggested, eyeing Patton's doorway. We are all on high alert and are in no condition to plan and strategize like this. Time to eat and rest and come back to this reinvigorated is possible and best idea right now. Is probably the best idea right now. You all think... You think all of us are going to be able to rest? Virgil growled, huffing and turning towards his room. Whatever. Patton's door clicked closed as Roman looked at Virgil's retreating back. Too much stress for the storm cloud, I take it? I could practically hear his thunder rumbling from inside. Is it safe for me to leave? Thomas mumbled, running his hand through his hair. I mean... Virgil does have a point. There's a freaking monster out there possessing people with a thirst for power. Kind of don't feel safe walking back home. You can stay here for the night. We did plan on meeting up tomorrow, as I'm sure we will all have contact our employers as well. Oh, I think I've been practicing this voice that might be perfect to call out of work. Roman, if you are too, how would you say... extra about it? They won't believe you. Roman stared at Logan and just slowly shook his head. Don't. Never again. Don't. Patton heard his bedroom door click closed and waited a moment before deciding to move. His body felt heavy, and every movement felt slow as he tried to push himself up. He blinked and rubbed his eyes before looking over at his bedside table and reaching for his glasses. He looked around, noticing the light in his room and the small plate that was previously next to his glasses. It simply held a glass of water and a bagel with a note. He reached for the paper first, reading it quickly before frowning and glaring at the note. He sat up and propped some of his pillows behind him before grabbing the plate and water. He took a sip and put it down, grateful they had given him a big glass. He usually refused to eat in bed, but this was one time that could be the exception, due to the unusual circumstances. He slowly ate, trying not to down his water as he went, eager to get out of bed as soon as he could, but not wanting to choke. He brushed off any crumbs best he could and slowly swung his legs over. He was still wearing his clothes from the night before as everything replayed in his head. He got up, feeling his feet protest and ignoring him, changing into more comfy lazy day clothes before he made his way to the roof. I don't care what they say. I'm not sitting here while they plan. Patton stopped as he reached for the doorknob and took a few steps back. He turned and sat on his bed before taking in a deep breath and closing his eyes. He flinched as the light grew bright and let out a gasp, looking at the copy on the floor staring up at him. Pat? 2? The one on the floor smiled and stood up, brushing himself off. Are you okay? Yeah, kinda. Worried. I wouldn't come out for a second there. Patton nodded and started standing back up, Two motioning to go help before remembering he couldn't touch Patton. Two opened the door and they made their way into the living room. Everything was silent and they shared a look. Patton nodded and Two headed for the front door. Okay, so why am I here again? Virgil looked around at the other three. I have nothing to practice. I stopped time. Whew, can I get back to bed? In a moment, Virgil. I was hoping to discuss something with you first. Now, Thomas, I understand you've been skeptical to use your powers before. Thomas nodded and stood up tall, glancing over at Roman. I get it. I thought about it last night. I'm anxious about it, but not doing anything will only make the situation worse. He turned towards Roman and smiled. Mind giving me a hand? I can use the help of someone who has a handle on things. Roman smiled and nodded, reaching out and extending a hand. Just a few moments. We need to see how long the power lasts after you take it. Logan watched as they talked back and forth, going over precautions before Thomas slowly reached out and took Roman's hand. Roman counted aloud, and Thomas quickly lets go at the end, small tiny sparks coming off his fingertips. Virgil walked over, also watching the two practice. It feels like we're preparing for war. Logan didn't answer, instead of turning his attention on Virgil. I need to ask you something very serious. Virgil froze and looked panicked, but Logan immediately interrupted his thoughts. How bad of an idea would it be to travel back and stop us all from meeting, preventing this whole situation in the first place? Virgil sighed and dropped his head, staring at the gravel roof underneath him. He glanced up and studied Logan's serious expression through his fallen hair before glancing back at the other two. Roman was explaining something to Thomas, going through motions slowly as the others watched on, taking in everything. Honestly, I've thought about it before, when you kind of revealed everything. Virgil kept watching the others, feeling Logan turn and stare him down. At the time, I knew I probably wouldn't do it for the same reason I won't do it now. He turned and looked at Logan with a heavy frown. Despite how terrible everything has been and how I feel about it all, I honestly still think you dorks are worth fighting for. Logan looked up shocked as Virgil quickly glanced away, trying to hide his obvious embarrassed blush. So, unless it becomes more severe, you still think we can keep going? Perhaps it's a final option plan then. Virgil hunched over, started talking softer. I don't want to be alone again. The door creaked open and Roman jumped, standing in front of Thomas protectively as to hide him from view. Patton appeared and smiled, waving at them all before turning to look down the way he came. Correction. Two opened the door as Patton came blinking out into the sunlight, glancing around. Logan marched over quickly before anyone else could register who it was and stared Patton down. You should be in bed, resting. The note said, I read the note, Logan. It said you would be up here, so here I am. Logan stopped and watched Patton carefully. Two smiled and shrugged as Patton stared back, determined and showing no signs of backing down. You said something about power training last night, right? And perhaps best if you rest a day first. We can go over this tomorrow if you're feeling better. Patton marched over to Logan, and he could tell that the other must have been feeling at least a little better. Patton stood up proudly and smiled at Logan. You brought the first aid kit, right? Logan looked back over his shoulder at Virgil, who shrugged and pointed to the one on the side they had brought up earlier. Please, Logan. I need to see 3. Patton, I'm not a doctor. I can't really take him to one. Please. Logan shut his eyes and took a moment, knowing full well that as soon as he opened his eyes and saw that Patton always gave, he'd instantly give in. He shook his head and opened them, smiling back at the other. I'll try. Thomas and Roman got close, bringing the kit and circling Patton carefully, so that no matter which way he falls, we got him, Patton, Roman said proudly, glancing around at the others. Even two was standing, excited and nervous. In a flash, Roman caught someone and looked down, seeing a more flustered Patton in his arms. 3, how are you holding up? Well, I'm not, seeing as you're holding me. 3 looked up and smiled at Roman, in much better condition than the night before. He sat him down slowly, and Logan was already there with the first aid kit. He, slowing, inspected 3's hands. Immediately noticing the burns from last night, he winced at how they looked before digging into the kit. This will hurt, 3, but it will make your hands heal faster. So, 3's hands are all hurt, but Patton's were just red? Thomas asked, glancing down to see the damage done. Oh, that's kind of bad, but not as bad as I was expecting. They've healed a lot, 3 mumbled, glancing down at his hands. I'm sure Logan's smart enough to figure out why, right? Logan kept his gaze intently on 3's hands, getting a bandage ready to clean and wrap them. He looked up and saw 3 looking at him, and smiled back. You okay? Yeah, I was talking to you, silly. Oh, sorry. Logan looked back down at 3's hands. Your left one is much more injured than your other one. Yeah, that's the one I shook Roman's hand with. The other tried pulling him off when he started threatening the monster out. 3 looked over and smiled at Roman. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't think of anything else, compadre. Patton stood up and walked away from the group as Logan took care of 3. He closed his eyes and just focused on his breathing. He heard footsteps and turned, watching 2 walks over with a smile. We're okay, Patton. We almost weren't. We would have been. Patton wasn't sure if he believed 2, and he wasn't sure if 2 even believed himself. They turned and looked at one another, and 2 smiled, spreading it to Patton's face. Want to see the others? 2 nodded and stood back up, watching Patton glow in bright light. Despite it being daytime, the others noticed the increase of light and glanced over, watching as Patton exploded into multiple of others. They started helping each other, except for the original, giving him space as he picked himself up and dusted himself down. He turned and looked at the others, all of his Patton pals turning and waving with varying levels of enthusiasm. Looks like you get to meet the family, 3 said, tugging his hand out of Logan's. Go ahead. I'm feeling fine for right now. The other stood back as the others rushed over, checking on 3. One even wrapped his other hand, thanking Logan as he did so. Logan stood up and backed off, smiling as we watched versions of Patton baby himself, his caring nature shining through. He bumped into someone and spun around quickly. I'm terribly sorry. It's okay, the copy said cheerfully. So you're Logan. The Patton crossed his arms and gave Logan a quick once-over. Well, it's nice to meet you. They call me 6. 6? Logan adjusted his glasses as he thought back. I believe you had been mentioned to me before. Oh, I'm sure, 6 muttered before perking right back up. You can just call me Patton or Pat, or whatever you want. I much prefer it over 6. Ah, I seem to recall you being a bit more rebellious, if I'm not mistaken. 6 frowned and crossed his arms. Is it rebellious to want to be the refers to me and not the sixth Patton? I don't understand. Are you not Patton, if not a small but significant part of him? Six simply smiled and leaned in a bit close to a whisper. If I did something, would you go walk over and say he did it? Or would you say I did it? Logan watched as the smile Six wore grew from cheerful to mischievous in an instant, a look he had never seen the other wear. He felt his face flush a little, causing Six to smile triumphantly before slowly backing away. Okay, guys, let's line up and introduce ourselves. A few helped three move over to the side, while others walked to Patton, getting into place. May I, Patton? Logan spoke, watching everyone get into place. I would like to see how well I've been able to figure you out. Patton smiled and nodded, motioning for him to go ahead and start. The others gathered around to watch and greet each other as they were introduced. Logan stopped in front of Two and smiled. Two likes to help around the house with chores or anything in general. Logan waved a hand over to Three, who had his wrapped hands in his lap as he watched. Three usually helps with the cooking and always likes to listen to Roman stories. It's true. Three waved at Roman, who smiled and waved back proudly. Then we have Four. Yours helping Virgil relax or telling Patton he needs to stop stretching himself too thin. Four smiled and nodded. Then we have Five. Patton's more sheepish and quiet parts. Five smiled and shrugged without a word. Logan looked over at Six, earning a quick wink he wasn't sure how to respond to. Six? Patton refers to you as rebellious. I mean, that's one word for it, I guess. Makes me sound all interesting. Logan couldn't help but smile. While each had been different, they all still came out to be the same for the most part. Logan turned his head and frowned, noticing one more Patton stood front and center. I'm sorry. I don't believe we've been introduced. Seven stretched out a hand and eagerly shook Logan's hand. Seven, of course. But you can't guess what I'm like. Patton quickly came over and grabbed Logan by the shoulders, pushing him away. Thank you, Seven. I appreciate it. Seven frowned and huffed, stomping his foot childishly as he did so. I wasn't even done talking to him, though. Patton laughed nervously, a bit embarrassed as his face turned a bit red. He gets jealous, so... Aw, that's too cute. Roman walked up and held a hand out for Seven. It's lovely to meet you. Seven perked up and took Roman's hand to shake. Roman gripped it firmly and pulled it close, keeping eye contact as he kissed the back of Seven's hand. He pulled away slowly and enjoyed watching him blush and giggle to himself. Well, nice to meet you too. Seven's eyes flickered over to Patton's and frowned a bit, watching as Patton still hadn't let go of Logan, who watched on, amused. Well, Patton cried out, we were supposed to be figuring our abilities out. He finally let go and clapped. Let's just sit down and talk like the good old days, shall we? Oh, Seven perked up. Can we talk about cute boys and play dress up like we used to? Oh yeah, my gosh, it's been so long. Yeah, how about you? No. Who? You know who? That guy? Oh yes! All the Pattons started giggling like schoolgirls, grouping up and gossiping as the original watched on, amused. I meant about our abilities. We can gossip later. I hear 3 and 5. I hear 3 was helping 5, and no, it was 4 messing with 3. Patton sighed and covered his face, embarrassed. I swear, I'm not normally like this. I just know how to bring out the worst in myself, I guess. Logan chuckled as Roman approached, slinging his arms over 2 of the others and immediately engrossing himself with all the gossip, reacting dramatically even if he didn't understand much of it. It seems like you are quite comfortable with yourself, though. Once we are all together, we share thoughts and feelings, but apart, they're kind of like their own person. Honestly, all the gossip is fake. We just think it's silly. Oh? So 5 totally didn't steal 2's favorite shirt and lie about it? Logan commented, still overhearing bits and pieces of the conversation. We all share the same clothes, Patton giggled, turning to Logan. Thank you, by the way, for taking care of 3. And, taking care of me, of course. You don't need to thank me, Patton. I know, but I want to. Patton grew quiet as he watched all his pals talking and laughing with one another. So, I can make a lot of me. How is that helpful at all? Logan snorted out a laugh and quickly threw a hand over his mouth. Sorry, he mumbled before clearing his throat, still smiling. Look at all that happiness you can spread. They say 2 heads are better than 1, and there are 7 of you cheering up everyone right now. Don't think I don't see what you're doing, Patton. Patton shrugged and looked over at 3, who had his eyes closed and was leaning against the wall. I have an idea if you're willing to hear it. When Logan didn't answer, he continued. Imagine you have a favorite shirt, but they get a hole in them at the seam. You quickly patch that seam, and the shirt quickly goes back to normal, like nothing ever happened. That's what I think happened to 3. I feel like he got hurt, but the rest of us were fine. Astute, very insightful. So, you imagine he healed faster because it wasn't the whole you that got injured? Maybe. The rest of the day went rather smoothly for the most part. Patton let his pals hang out, and they all talked around 3 when he was done taking a nap. Patton pulled him back in when he said he was still tired, though. The others quickly followed, except 6 and 7. 7 wanted to talk to Roman more, and 6 was already trying to convince Patton that he didn't need to go back. Eventually, they both gave in, and it grew a lot quieter. Thomas practiced on and off with Roman and Logan. He even talked about Virgil about the possibilities of learning how to stop time in case it is needed down the line. They still didn't know much about the creature. They were determined to stop and were trying to be cautious. They talked about strategies and made plans to bait the creature out, thinking of best possible ways. Virgil was adamant that using one of them as bait was a terrible idea, and they could just try something new, but it was growing dark and they split their ways before they were able to decide. Roman approached Logan and pulled him into his room when they were done to talk. A smile on his face. Logan sat on Roman's bed as the other stood there silent until it grew on the other's nerves. Roman, what is it you wanted to discuss with me? 7 can be persuaded pretty easily, you know. Jealous guys are always the ones with the juiciest gossip. If you were expecting me to get excited about some fake gossip, you're sadly misinformed. Come on, you totally have a crush on Patton. You'll want to hear this. My emotions for the other are completely irrelevant right now, Roman. Roman blinked and looked at Logan confused before shaking his head. Wait, did you just admit to having feelings for Patton? Do you speak English or would you prefer another language? Roman's mouth opened and closed, not unlike that of a fish, as he pointed to Logan, then the door, at a loss for words. Then why don't you tell him? Roman angrily whispered. What are you afraid of? Oh, well, there's a list. Logan, hand up a hand, holding a finger out. There's the obvious rejection, humiliating myself, ruining a friendship I hold dear to my emotional outburst, and I'm not fit to be in such an emotionally compromising situation. Roman held up his hands. Nope, stop. Okay, I get it. But why do you think you're not ready to date? People have already asked you to date them before. Why is Patton different? What if he doesn't like me? Or if he does, my lack of understanding emotions just ruins the whole thing. I am no longer friends with any of the people I previously dated. I would not be happy with that outcome with Patton. You could end up living happily forever after. Preposterous. There's no such thing. Roman groaned and pulled his hair back. So you're just gonna sit there and do nothing? Well, you are the best at relationships, as you always say. I am merely following your example. Logan stood up and shot Roman a cocky smirk. I am done discussing this for now. We will talk more another time. As the door clicked, Roman huffed, mind racing about how he was going to get the two oblivious lovebirds together. Following my example, huh? Whatever that means. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to hear more, please subscribe because I'm going to be uploading the rest of the book and it's going to be fun. And yeah, and it's very chill. So once again, thank you for watching, and much like Roman trying to get Logan to ask Patton out, do your best.